Welcome to Political Musings on this Monday. With me today, two special guests. We have Del Frey. Frey or Fry? Is it Del Frey or Del Fry? You're muted, Dale. All right. Well, at Hava Johnston, Hava, you're running for Texas State House District 106, correct?
Ma'am, I sure am.
And Dale, you're still muted.
Dale, you're muted.
There we go.
Oh, I'm sorry. I hit the wrong button. Okay. Yes, I'm running for Texas State Senate District 30.
To Texas Senate District 30. And is it Del Frey or Del Fry?
It's Frey, but
Frey.
it's fine. I get called all sorts of names, so.
I understand. I've had my name. People say Manuel when it's just manual, like manual transmission.
Don't even get me started on name pronouncing.
Well, we're going to talk today about issues relating to the Texas legislature. The thing I want to start off with, though, is how important these down ballot races are, no matter who you are, no matter where you live. That so much happens at the state level. For example, I've got a son getting married in November, right after the election. I would like my grandchildren to be born here in Texas so that I can see them on the regular. But it's not safe to be a pregnant person in the state of Texas right now. And if we're going to fix that, we have to fix it within the Texas legislature, which means Democrats have to get control of the Texas legislature. And one of the things people think Texas has always been red. No, it's only the last 30 years. It didn't happen all of a sudden, and it didn't start at the top. It didn't start with governor. It didn't start with the lieutenant governor, or really any of the statewide offices. It started down at the local level. They started electing Republican sheriffs and judges and all of these things that are down on the ballot that people weren't paying attention to, and they got into the voting booths. And Democrats have a really bad habit of voting once every 4 years, going in, marking who they want for president, and then leaving. Listen to me when I say this. You cannot do that this year. It is too important.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. And when you first, before I even go into the down the ballot energy that we really need to have, Texas, like you said, it's not a red state. It's a non-voting state. Less than half of the people who are registered to vote bother to show up at the voting booth. And we don't even have all that many people registered to vote. Like, not all of us are registered to vote. This is a non-voting state. That's why it feels like the state is red. It's not really. It's just that I think that there's a lot of people who feel disencouraged. I think there's a lot of people who feel like their vote doesn't matter because we have this idea in our head that it's so red, right? But that's going to change. But it can only change when we actually show up to vote. Now, when you talk about how much it matters to really vote all the way down the ballot, and also when it comes to our local elections, yes, absolutely. I think that really showed a lot. I tell you, in the last presidential debate, I was kind of yelling at the television at Donald Trump, where he was trying to defend himself when it comes to pro-life, pro-choice. He said that he wants to give it to the states. So it's like, oh, this should be a state issue. Doesn't even matter. I'm Donald Trump. I'm basically playing defense. It's the states' rights, blah, blah, blah. It's a common thing they say all the time. But it frustrates me as a Texan because I know what's going on here in Texas right now. There is a legitimate, real push to not only go farther with this, but even to ban in vitro fertilization and ban surrogacy. Yep. We have two billionaires in Texas named Tim Dunn and Ferris Wilks, who fund the majority of the Republican representatives in our state legislature, and they're pushing for extremist agendas. So I initially, and before, previous to coming down here to Texas, I would believe in states' rights. But now that I live here in Texas, I see how extreme the right has gone at our state level. And I say, my God, like, we need protection against our own representatives. I mean, it's one of the many reasons I'm running for office myself, but it really does matter upon, you know, who you vote for, and making sure you know who your representatives are at the state level, because we got to have a lot of bad actors here at the state level, between my opponent or even Jared Patterson, who Hava can talk more about, who, you know, care more about their personal self-interests over the interests of the people. But Hava, if you want to talk more about that, then I suppose you can.
Well, before we get too deep into the weeds, let's first of all, Hava, explain to listeners where your district is.
Sure. All right. So, House District 106. I've got a really bad connection, and I might have to jump out back in.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's like everything's echo. So it's kind of weird. So real quick, okay, so my district is all Denton County, and it runs from Frisco, Prosper, Salina, up the 380 corridor, across into Sanger. So it covers areas like Aubrey, Pilot Point, a lot of unincorporated Denton County space. We do get the outer loop of Denton. A little bit of Louisville ISD. A small portion of Little Elm, half of Crossroads, and the Colony. So it's a vast district that is about 50-50 rural to urban spaces.
And Dale, where's your district?
So I live in a big, massive area. It stretches across 11 counties. It goes from northern Denton County all the way up to the North Texas border, out to Wichita Falls, almost down to Fort Worth, but not quite. And it also stretches northeast out to Sherman as well. So 11 counties, so it's a big, massive area. In the state of Texas, House districts have around a population of 200,000 people, and Senate districts have around 900,000 people. So it's a big, massive area with a big population, but I've been doing a lot of driving. But I look forward to fighting the good fight.
Yeah, I talk about the districts that I live in that are so big, and one of them is your district. I live in Senate District 30. It was, for me, the only runoff in the primary was your runoff. It's a member of Congress. Now, which congressional district are the two of you in?
I think Hava and I actually might be in two different ones, even though you live in Frisco, Hava. I live in the Colony. For me, my Ernest Lineberger is a Democrat running for CD 26 where I live. Hava, which district do you live in?
I have Simon Cardell as my Democratic candidate for C4, I believe, is where I am.
So you're in Congressional District 4? And we all live in the same county, but we're all three in different congressional districts because, and at one time we would have all three been in Congressional District 26, but when they did the redistricting in 2020, that's when, I mean, Texas was already gerrymandered to hell and back, and then they just went way above and beyond in this last round, particularly with congressional districts. But state rep and state senate have also been even more gerrymandered than they were before.
Yeah, we got dealt a heavy hand in the last redistricting. I mean, in Denton County, we used to have 4 state house seats. Now we have 5, which is cool, but they were able to draw the lines and draw them to their advantage. Case in point, there's a woman named Michelle Beckley who used to be our Denton County representative, and when they did the
first
redistricting,
in 34 years, first Democrat in Denton County elected in 34 years in 2018.
Yep.
Yeah, but what really did a huge number to us is when they did the redistricting, they redistricted Michelle Beckley into a different House district, and they did that intentionally because they knew that Denise Wooten was going to run again for office, and they knew that Michelle Beckley would tend to too, which really sucks for our Flower Mound area, because we had 2 Texas Democrats who previously have experience running for office. One, Michelle Beckley, being a previous state House rep. And they basically forced them into a primary, which was pretty harsh. Again, I want to remind everyone that in the last cycle, we had 3 state House seats run unimposed in the last cycle. And the reason for that, of course, was because they just did the redistricting. When you do redistricting, it puts the Republicans in such an advantage that it's hard to get candidates to run. Which is why we saw so many state House races run unopposed last time. But I'm thankful that we have every seat with a candidate this time around. I don't think we have any races on the Democrat state House side in Texas that are unopposed this time around. So that's good to see.
And it's so important for so many issues that we do. It's these lower down the ballot races where we can win. It's certainly more difficult with redistricting. They strategically did packing and cracking, which means that they shove all the Democrats into one district, or they split them up into a whole bunch of districts. So, for example, the northern part of Denton is where you have both the University of North Texas and you have Texas Woman's University. So those are pretty liberal campuses.
And they cut both of those campuses out of House District 106. I wonder why. They also cut out this beautiful part. So back last time Jared Patterson had an opponent, our map went like this. You know why they cut this little blue town called Little Elm out of our map? Because they're blue, because they have a Democratic mayor, because they have Democrats on their school board, because they have Democrats in their city council, and because they believe in equality and a fine opportunity, like living for everyone. So you see how this little part of my map has that little divot chunked out of it?
Yeah.
That little divot right there is a little town called Savannah. It's just a little tiny neighborhood, but because Savannah's trending blue, they chalked it right out.
That's right.
And they left me with all of this. You know what's up here? Nothing. Nothing is up here. You know how many voters are up here? Maybe 30. There's like 4 people who live on 500 acres of land, and they all think the same way. Yeah. So it's when I say that my district is literally half urban and half rural, the Colony, Briscoe, and everything else.
Right.
And our representative isn't representing everything else. Or
they're just representing those rural folks and the uber religious and the extreme far right that honestly don't care if women die because they couldn't get, that DNC after they had a miscarriage. They don't care.
Well, that was God's will.
Yeah.
It was God's will that you were raped and you were impregnated. That was God's will.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what they'll argue over and over.
I have a tendency to veer off into that subject because it's near and dear to my heart, and it's a battle I've been fighting for a quarter of a century now.
Yep.
To try and take Texas back to where it was when I was in high school and college. I'm not asking to go back to that far or get long. Just,
They
but
want to go further. They'll go further back.
yeah, I mean,
They'll go
Texas
back.
used to be very rational on the subject, but we are going to talk about today two important issues, and that is education and insurance reform. So let's start with the topic of education. And Hava, I'll let you start off with what you feel
Just
needs to happen in the
what needs
Texas,
to happen, what doesn't need to happen.
and what doesn't need to happen.
Those are two things. As many of your listeners have probably been following along, and for those who haven't, in our last legislative session, you know that the governor had called the House back multiple times for special sessions to discuss school funding and what he calls educational savings accounts, aka vouchers, and has basically, even though the House was able to hold them for now, we were not able to pass the funding that we needed, because he is holding our funding hostage by wrapping it up in a bill that would have to pass school vouchers. So sure, we'll give you the funding you need, but first we're going to take funding away so that we can hand it over to rich billionaires so they can subsidize their kids' private school. Makes a lot of sense. Vouchers are exactly what they sound like, and has what they've always been. It's been reframed over and over again and renamed, and it's consistently an attempt to resegregate our schools.
Yes.
Texas has been fighting back against this since Brown versus the Board of Education. Every time this has come up for a vote, whether it was a House vote or it was a local vote, it's been pushed down because it's not what Texans want.
Right.
Texans
In particular, you know who doesn't want it?
Part of our Constitution, the very backbone of what makes this state great, is that we believe in a public education system that prepares the future and the next generations of Texans to propel us and to progress us. And we rely on the public education system to make sure that we are the best and the brightest, and that we have great workers and a great economy. And, you know, people want to come and live in our state, and it's been working. But for some people, it's an opportunity for them to disguise their motives, like I said, of resegregating their schools and pushing their Christian nationalist agenda.
Mm-hmm.
It starts from the inside with things like what my opponent has presented in House Bill 900 with his book ban. I know you and Amy and we've talked about that in the past. It seems like a simple thing, just a couple of titles out of a handful of over 5,000. Couple titles out of a handful of school libraries, but that's where they've got tentacles, and they reach in and they start controlling, like you mentioned, from the ground up. Let's attack a school librarian because, you know, they have a lot of power, right? So they'll wrap their hands around the school library. They'll wrap their hands around the school's, nurses. Let's replace our school counselors with chaplains. Let's hang the 10 Commandments in every single one of our classrooms, but disregard the, religious rights of all of those other faiths and non-faith students, or even blended faith families. It's a real slap in the face to equality and diversity that we as Texans, we love that. We love being a great, big, friendly state. So much that we have a giant, 24-story cowboy that greets you at our state fair in multiple languages because he's telling everyone hello, not just some people hello. So that's the spirit of Texas, and it's being ripped out of our schools, and that's the foundation. And they know once just like a good house, I'm a real estate agent, I flip a lot of houses. If the foundation's bad, you got to fix it. Doesn't do any good to put in pretty windows and paint the walls if you've got a bad foundation. And they know that if they rock the foundation, the core of what makes us great, it's only going to simplify their agenda in breeding it into the other places in our lives. So it is ultimately going to be up to the House and the Senate because it's not enough if the House can hold it back. It's going to have to go into the Senate, and the Senate is also going to have to push back on this. So it's not enough to win one or the other. This is going to take a joint effort from both House and Senate members to make sure that we can simply, just like Nancy Reagan did to drugs in the 80s, just say no to vouchers.
Well, Dale,
Yeah.
you wanted to comment on that?
Yeah, yeah, and so you asked a very good question. And we do, and obviously, I mean, the voucher thing is like the number one issue right now because the government keeps pushing for that. And obviously, yes, we have to reject the vouchers. I would talk about that, but I mean, I think Hava hit the nail on the head. I do want to add into even if I was to wave a magic wand and make all the vouchers go away and disappear, or if we lived in an alternate reality where vouchers do not exist, we also need to fund our public schools as well. Mm-hmm. Now, our schools are underfunded as it is right now. And if you were to ask a Republican, and I've seen multiple Republicans go up on a stage and say the following, they say, hey, look, we've been giving more money to our public schools than we ever have in the past. Technically speaking, that's true. Technically speaking, it's true. But it's not true when you take into account inflation. So the ISDs, the school boards, do not determine how much money they receive themselves. The amount of money that goes to each ISD is determined by a formula that is devised by the legislature. I can go into how that formula works, but ultimately, in the end of the day, it's a formula called WETA. But really what matters the most is a static number called the basic allotment. And that basically is a number, it's a static number that sits above every kid's head. That number can be adjusted based upon their attendance and also based upon their needs if they're at risk or special ed, et cetera. But essentially, there's a static number in that formula that has not been adjusted since long before the pandemic. And so as we've seen inflation grow over time, that has decreased the amount of that has in fact decreased the amount of money that actually goes to our public schools. It kind of decreases everything everywhere. We have the same problem with our healthcare system, with the health and human services, or even the people who make minimum wage, right? I mean, if you made minimum wage before the pandemic and you make minimum wage now, you're basically value-wise, you're receiving less money now, right? And the same thing is happening to our public schools. Our legislature only meets for half a year, and they only meet for half a year once every other year. And every time they've been looking at to adjust the basic allotment, to adjust the rates that go to our public education system, they've always tried to tie that with the school voucher scam, which of course is always bombed in the House. And that's why we haven't seen an adjustment to the rates of the funding that comes from our legislature to our public schools. And that's how and why our public education system is underfunded as it is. It's a problem that compounds itself because there are people on the other side of the aisle who says, look at our schools, they're failing us. We need to send your kid to a private school because our public schools are failing us. Well, our public schools are failing us because of this push for vouchers tied in with the needed adjustment for the basic allotment, which is what causes this. So
it's all one big plan. It's all been, it seems like it's all been a plan that was put in place, like you said, long before the pandemic. It's been an issue. I've raised 4 kids. I've put them through public schools and have had to homeschool some at times, and I even had to private school one of them at one point. But the system itself has always been set up and has been deteriorating year after year after year. My oldest is 30, my youngest is 18. You can see the drastic change from what was normal funding levels for my now 30-year-old when they were in high school versus what was a normal funding level for my 18-year-old. There wasn't a lot of difference. So I feel like the system is put in place specifically to fail so that they can come in and then push for even harder for their vouchers and ESAs. We can say, Texas is 42nd in funding in the nation, and we're 44th in our student outcome. You can look at that and say there's a direct correlation between the two, but people on the other side of the aisle, our counterparts, will say, yeah, there is a problem. And the only answer to fixing that is to let parents have a choice to put their kids in private schools with public funds. that's their answer to the problem they created by wanting that to be the answer in the first place. So,
right. So
it's a tricky. They're a tricky bunch.
Let me just point something out for Republicans listening. You know who really doesn't want vouchers? All those Republican voters in rural areas, because it cuts the fundings to their schools. And something that is just such backward thinking that we've been hearing for decades now from the GOP is the way to fix a problem is to cut funding to it. Like, if this school is not doing well, we should take money away from that school. No! You need to put more funds and more resources into those failing schools so that they can succeed. The answer is not, oh, well, this kid isn't doing so well in school. Let's just take him out of school and put him to work in the coal mines. No! Put him to work out on the oil derrick. No. You need to help that student. And the one thing that public schools do and are required to do, which private schools are not, is help those students that are having trouble. Because you know what happens with those private schools? They test kids before they go in. And if they can't do well enough, then they don't get into the school. So they're only getting the best students to begin with, and they're not even having to serve those that are having behavioral problems or that are having problems with learning disabilities. But our public schools always do that. I'm going to start with Dale, and then I'll go to you, Hava.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up, because if you have a kid with special needs or a learning disability, then you're going to probably be SOL, because those private schools are not going to take your kid. Like you mentioned, there's always entry exams to these schools. I wanted to talk about this a little bit because I was so frustrated. I know I should be talking about my personal political opponent, but I hate to bring up Jared Patterson over and over again. But we were at the Frisco Lakes.
I'll take all the help I can get.
Okay. Well, Hav and I were both at the Frisco Lakes candidate forum, and we saw Jared Patterson up there on stage, and he literally, I kid you not, he was trying to give a talking point saying that if you have a kid with special needs, that the voucher program would help you. I mean, like, I was silent, but inside my head I was screaming real loud, like, man, like, it's the opposite. It's the opposite. Like, if you have a kid with special needs, like, you need public schools, because private schools are not going to help you. The private schools are private sector companies that care about their personal self-interest, which is why, they want they have these entry exams where they only accept the top kids they can possibly get to make their scores look good. But public education is a public utility. The public schools have to take your kid no matter what, and it's their obligation to take care of your kid, even if your kid has special needs, which is why, public education and our public utilities are so important. But I can go on that for a while, but how about you could probably talk more about that?
Well, it's one of the, yes, obviously, it's the kids with the special needs are certainly going to be hurt. The kids in rural areas, like more than half of my district, there's not a private school within 25 miles of Pilot Point, Texas. The closest private school they're going to find is going to be in Frisco. And if you think for a second that if you live in a rural area of Pilot Point, that, a couple $1,000s is going to help, bridge the gap to a private school in Frisco, you really need to look at what tuition costs. I'd like to also point out that, private schools also, they don't have to hire actual teachers. They don't have any type of hiring regulation as to, do they have to have a Texas certified teacher? Do you have to have gone to XYZ University or spent so many times or so many years in training? They can just, cherry pick whoever's mom and say they're going to be your history teacher, and here's the history we want you to teach. And that takes me to my next part is there is no government or even regulatory oversight in private schools. It is just that. It is a private school. You just the same. Think about what has happened with the privatization of hospitals. Community hospitals, they have to take anybody at any time for any reason and take you in and work with you, and they work with community service programs to help make sure that their care is affordable, and see more patients. It's a public hospital. Private hospitals, on the other hand, don't, and can charge whatever they want on their own scale and hire whatever doctors, or not hire some. The same thing's going to happen in private schools. So you're going to end up with less of an education. We won't have a standard of education throughout our state. So we'll have a disproportionate educational balance. You'll have some areas that you're going to have lots of really good, maybe even diverse private schools that people can afford to and can send their kids to, and maybe they take advantage of this program if it is passed. But then you're going to have other areas that have no option. Their public schools will then be shut, closed, or even worse, combined with other areas who don't have public schools anymore. So now they're having students bus in to one major rural area within a district as other schools shut down. So, like in my district, for example, little towns like Krugerville and Hackberry probably won't find their own private schools built, or even be able to maintain their own public schools. So maybe an area like Aubrey that's also rural but has its own well-built ISD, all those other kids are going to bust into that one school. It's going to overload that school and those teachers, and it's just going to have an overall ripple effect on the education standards across our state. Long-term effects, this is going to affect our workforce. It's going to get less and less people coming to Texas universities. The majority of students in Texas graduate from Texas high schools. They go to Texas state universities. They go to in-state schools, not out-of-state schools, because we got great colleges.
They're
not going to be doing that if they're not graduating in public schools here in the state. They'll be utilizing out-of-state schools. And
can I just bring something up
on that? It's going to have a huge
that?
ripple effect, more than just the kids sitting at the desk. And I think we need to really get a good idea of the huge big picture.
And excuse me, to your point, one of the things that got me active in Texas politics a quarter of a century ago was when they deregulated our state college universities. It used to be very inexpensive for people to attend our state universities. I went to a state university. I went to Lamar down in Beaumont. My kids went to University of North Texas, but let me tell you what the difference is. When the Republicans took over and deregulated state college tuition, it was right before, a couple of years before my oldest son started at the University of North Texas, and the tuition immediately skyrocketed. And that is because Republicans control the Texas legislature, which is one of the reasons we need y'all there. But one more thing that you brought up, Hava, that I want to put a pin in, and that is you talked about minimum wage. Now, Texas legislature can control that, but it has not. And so we are at the same place as whatever the national minimum wage is, that's the minimum wage in Texas. And the tipped minimum, which is a little obsession of mine, this is what your waiter typically makes, is only $2.13 and has been that for the entire life of my 31-year-old son.
Yep.
$2.13 an hour. Now, I know if they don't make the full $7.35 in tips, then they're supposed to be paid the difference. Ask me how often that happens.
Never.
Yeah, they don't do that. And the other thing that happens is when the Republicans took over during the Reagan administration, they started taxing the tips, payroll taxes on tips. So y'all can have some say over that and do something about the minimum wage. If we can just get the two of you elected to the Texas legislature.
You
Yeah.
have a
Dale,
lot better chances of getting that done, for sure.
that's right. Dale, you have anything to
Yeah,
add
no,
on
I was going
any
to
of
say
this?
absolutely, and I think I kind of touched on this a little bit before. The minimum wage, technically speaking, has not decreased because it's been at the rock bottom that it possibly can be because of the national the regulations. But because of inflation, people are still pulling in a value that actually is less over time. So I mean, this is something that affects like every sector of government, like education and healthcare, but also minimum wage as well. I mean, if you made minimum wage before the pandemic and you made minimum wage now, you are actually, value speaking, are pulling in even less money now. So absolutely, the minimum wage needs to be increased, and we also need to take care of our unions and things like that. That would be like another thing I would go into when we talk about minimum wage and basically what people need to pull in for their livelihood. But I can go on to that for a while, but I don't know
Yeah,
if
I
that's
mean, it's not like the cost of living hasn't gone up in a quarter of a century, you know, or really longer than that, because 30 years, we have not had an increase in the tip minimum, and maybe a little less. I think it's only like 15 years or 16 years since we increased. When was the last time we increased the total minimum wage? Any idea?
And in Texas?
Well, at the national level, because Texas doesn't have a minimum wage, so it's whatever
yeah,
the
there was
federal
yeah.
is.
I can't remember, but I know it was not the state level that did that. It was the congressional level that
Right.
upped it. Because like we're actually tied with a couple of other states in the country for the lowest minimum wage because of it's not like the state of Texas unfortunately would have a lower minimum wage if it could.
Right.
The only reason it's as high as it is now is because of the national minimum. But yeah,
I mean,
Mm-hmm.
think about this: $7 and what 50 cents an hour is the minimum, and 213 is the tip minimum. Uh, you can't even. That's not even a decent part-time job for a high school
yeah,
student.
To answer your question, the last time that we raised the minimum wage was July 24th, 2009. It was raised from $6.55 for all covered non-exempt workers to $7.25.
And that exempt, and one of the things in Project 2025, I think, is that they would do away with time and a half for overtime and just do away with overtime pay. So that, your boss can have you work 60, 70 hours a week, but you're only going to get paid for the 40. Or you're only going to get paid the same wages you were paid at 40. And
yeah,
so,
it's really frustrating. I mean, this is uh, incentives like Project 2025. They're funded and founded by personal corporate interests. These are corporate individuals who do not care about the people. These are individuals who do not like unions. These are individuals who want to do away with any type of regulation that protects workers or the working class. It's very unfortunate. It's insane to think that we're here where we're at today. But again, I remind the audience and everyone that this is why we vote. This is why we make sure that we all understand what Project 2025 is. We understand that Donald Trump wants to distance himself from Project 2025, yet employed J.D. Vance as his VP, and J.D. Vance is the author of the forward for Project 2025. And we really need to understand, who our representatives are and who our candidates are, because this is like a working class versus corporate interests situation that we're in. So yeah, it's sad to think that we have the lowest minimum wage here in Texas. It's sad to think that Texas would have an even lower minimum wage if it weren't for the national minimum. And
Exactly.
it's sad to think that they're trying to do away with time and a half, like you were talking about, Amy. But these are the things that are on the line, and these are the things that are at stake in this upcoming election.
Yeah. Just work your entire existence with little time to sleep. We're not going to help you out with childcare. We're not going to help you. We're going to take money away from your public schools that you were sending your kids to, and you know you're not going to make enough, even if you're working 2 and 3 jobs, just to get by. It's really sad. Uh, let's hit on. Well, we're running out of time so quickly here
No,
today.
don't run out of time.
But let's get to insurance.
All right. Insurance reform. It's something I've been talking about because it's not something that gets talked about, but should be. It's not exciting. It's not a major news media talking point. It's not something that you're going to hear, are at the top of the ticket arguing back and forth about, and it's not going to ever make the news. But what is making the news? The rising cost of homeownership, the rising cost of insurance claims, the rising cost of housing unaffordability. Well, a big portion of that mortgage payment that people are paying every month and allows for a home buyer to be qualified for a mortgage is their homeowner's insurance. And, insurance, the industry in general, it's an interesting product. The state tells us we have to have it. We aren't given a whole lot of choice as far as the marketplace and where we get it and who we can get it from. The Texas Department of Insurance is the one who regulates it. So it's state regulated, state mandated, but it's not state provided. Then we can be penalized. We can actually lose our home, our property, if we don't have it. It can be forced on us by a lien holder, such as our mortgage company or our automobile lender, can put their own policy on it that's 3 times as expensive as the one we would have gotten, and we're still forced to pay for it. So if we want to talk about how, as a realtor, I know we cannot control the real estate market. There's really not much we can do to control the buying and the selling of properties. What we can control is the out-of-pocket costs for homeowners and home buyers. And one of those out-of-pocket costs is homeowners insurance. And as a state legislator, that is one of the things that I can actually do. We can actually control that. Interesting fact, we have not had serious, big time insurance reform in Texas since 1991. 1991, in the 72nd legislative session, I believe, yes. They passed the most comprehensive insurance reform legislation. It was HB 2 and HB 62 in all of Texas history. It affected everything from rate making to the compulsory auto insurance liability law. The state board renamed the was renamed to the Department of Insurance, and we created tons and tons of oversight jobs. And it even went on to the next legislative session in the 73rd legislative session, when they continued to make some of those reforms a reality. This is what Governor Ann Richards ran her campaign on. This is also what she won her campaign on, because this is fiscal responsibility. This is fiscal conservatism. This is a should be bipartisan, nonpartisan for every Texan, because it will affect all of you, whether or not you own your home, you want to buy your home, you want to sell your home, or you're leasing a home. This is real. It comes out of your pocketbook every day. So some of the things that we can do is we can put caps on the rates. We can change the legislation to where insurance companies cannot deny claims and deny your renewal based on the claims that you've made. It's not your fault that a hurricane came through and took away your roof, and now you have to make a claim for the insurance that you paid for, but we're not going to renew you. You've done nothing wrong and paid your rates and paid your dues, and when you need them, they're gone. We can fix that. And by fixing those things, we can make it more affordable and affect, again, ripple effects. This will change the economy and housing affordability, and you'll see more homeowners suddenly being able to afford their homes and more homeowners being able to stay in their homes after natural disasters when they need the help of their insurance companies. They won't be forced out. So that is it's a big thing that I want to bring to the House floor. It's not something, like I said, a lot of people want to talk about because there's a lot to know. I encourage everybody on the call, if you are not aware, the TexasWatch.org is a great organization that actually will watch over the insurance lobbyists and provide with real facts and information to the consumers and the average public.
Dale, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, when I know my mind kind of goes to a dark place, but when I think of the power of these insurance companies and all the amount of money they put into the legislatures, I think of Florida because I know in the past 2 years there was legislation that was passed in Florida to make it more difficult to sue an insurance company for not providing their services to you, and this is after they kept on getting hit by hurricane after hurricane after hurricane, right? Essentially, with climate change and all that, and all the storms that are hitting the area, I guess the insurance companies are finding out that it's not in their personal business best interest to actually service their members. But that's the type of thing that happens when these big businesses and corporations kind of purchase out the local politicians. So there's definitely a system of checks and balances that we need to watch out for. I mean, my house got hit with some straight line winds that tore the shingles off my roof, and we got like rainwater like inside of our house and things like that. It took a while, and it took a lot of. We got our house fixed eventually over time. It took just over half a year, and there was a lot of back and forth. But you really got to fight with these insurance companies. I've seen it myself. So there's definitely some things where I think we need to make things a little bit more fair because these insurance companies certainly lobby. They lobby a lot, and they are looking out for their personal corporate self-interests. And look, we live in a capitalistic system, and in a system of capitalism, of course, every business is going to be looking out for their personal business self-interests. But I think that things obviously need to be balanced. So that we don't shaft over the common citizen and civilian.
When I was invited up to Austin to chat with Texas Watch during a House candidate training, and this is what started this conversation for me because again, being in real estate and working so closely with the people that this affects the most. It's a conversation I have on a regular basis. So I was super interested and engaged when we were talking. And I thought it was interesting, a couple of facts that, in Texas, we pay more than twice the national average for our homeowners and our auto insurance. Yet our coverage has been slashed, meaning we actually pay that twice as much, but we get significantly less. So not only do we pay more, but we're paying more for less of a product than you would in other states. The average, so I have some information here. It says that the CEOs at the 10 largest auto and home insurers paid $250 million. They were paid $250 million in just the last 2 years. And this is stats from 2023. Just as an example, the executive, Thomas Wilson at Allstate, in 2022, his compensation was $18,902,127. That was his salary. The total compensation in the year 2022 for the top 10 insurance executives ran into $130,617,043. That is a lot of money that these insurance CEOs are being paid to make sure that the product that you need from them is less of a product that costs twice as much as it should. And then you're punished as the consumer when you need to use the product you paid for.
Well, I so thankful to both of you for joining me here today. Uh, Dale, what is your website so that people can learn more about you?
Sure. To remind everyone, my name is Dale Frey. Frey is spelled F-R-E-Y, and if you want to learn more about me, you can come to my website at freyfortexas.com. That's I'm sorry, that's F-R-E-Y for Texas.com.
And Hava, what's your website?
Hi. Okay, so you can find me at www.hava106.com. It's not a radio station, but someday it may be. So you can also find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, tweet, all the different socials you can possibly think of. I have a whole team of people out there posting things every day on every media channel you can find. So, and be for sure to check out my YouTube channel, where you can also see that forum that Dale had mentioned, where we got to both kind of take some jabs at Representative Patterson. And there's a couple of other insightful videos there as well. I encourage you all to watch. And again, the website that I mentioned on insurance reform is texaswatch.org.
All right. Well, thank you so much to the both of you. Before we go, I want to bring up, we lost last night a great Texas icon, Chris Christopherson. Fantastic singer-songwriter. A lot of people don't know, when you hear Janis Joplin singing Me and Bobby McGee, that was written by Chris Christopherson. And he also, a lot of people know him from the A Star Is Born, that starred Chris Christopherson and Barbara Streisand. So a great loss to such a talented singer-songwriter and actor. That's all we have time for today. I want to thank both Dale Frey, running for Texas Senate District 30, and Hava Johnston, running for Texas House District 106. As I remind you every week, get registered, get informed, get politically active, and go vote. And if you don't have anything nice to say, come sit by me.
Awesome, Amy. Thank you so much.